Hi and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire and I hope you're having a great day. Today I thought I'd share some fun backgrounds created using layered Oxide ink stamping. Oxide ink is a unique ink that I've used in videos before, and I will link to a kind of intro about the ink video here. And we're going to create some colorful backgrounds with this ink on a few different papers. However, if you do not have Distress Oxide inks, at the end of this video, I'll show how to get a similar look using traditional Distress inks. So stay tuned to the end for that. In the meantime, all of the cards created in the first part of this video use the wonderful Distress Oxide inks. Now, Distress Oxide inks are unique for many reasons, but really it comes down to this. Distress Oxide inks have both pigment and dye ink properties, so they're very unique. And when they come in contact with water, they kind of brighten or turn whiter in that area. We're going to take advantage of that property today by creating some stamped backgrounds where we use a little bit of ink and a little bit of water. Now, all of the backgrounds that I'm creating today use Simon Says Stamp center cut stamps. These are unique stamps where the center comes out, so you can use the background stamp as one piece or two separate pieces. Now, this is the star version of the center cut stamp. It's a new one. Another new one is this one. This is the burst center cut stamp. And I really like that sunshine in the center. And then I'm also going to be using an older one that is a heart. So this was one of the first ones that they came out with, and I'll use that today. I've used this in a video before, and I'll link to it here if you want to see other ways to use it. And then finally, another new center cut stamp. This is the flowers. It's this beautiful flower cluster in the center, or you can use the border alone or together, of course. Okay, so let's get started with creating our backgrounds using the Oxide inks and these background stamps. I'm first going to start with the Distress Oxide inks on white cardstock, just traditional white cardstock. Any should work for this. I'm using Neenah Classic Crest Solar White in 110 pound, simply because that's my favorite cardstock and it takes ink well. So I am pressing a Distress Oxide ink directly onto this paper so that I apply it very generously, very heavily, and I want to end up with solid color. This happens to be the Salty Ocean Distress Oxide ink, and again, I'm putting this onto traditional white cardstock. I have put my center cut star background stamp into my MISTI. To do a cling stamp in a MISTI stamping tool like this, you need to just remove the cushion from the inside, and then you can use the thicker cling stamp like I am today. I'm just temporarily taping into the MISTI my inked cardstock, and I'm just going to mist my stamp. So my stamp has nothing on it. I'm just misting it lightly with water from about 2 feet above. And then I'm going to stamp this on here. Now, this isn't the technique I'm going to be using throughout the video, but I wanted to show you what just water does when you stamp with just water on the Distress Oxide inked background. You can see you get like a ghost-like look on the background that's really soft and beautiful. However, I wanted to step that up in today's video by adding some color to that. So I went ahead and I created another piece of white cardstock covered with the same Salty Ocean Distress Oxide ink. We're going to do the technique again, but this time, before we spritz the stamp with water, I'm going to ink it up with the Squeezed Lemonade Distress Oxide ink. This is a very light yellow ink. I've inked it up. I'm protecting my inked surface with that mat so that when I spray it, I don't get mist on it. I mist my stamp a few times, and I'm stamping this onto the blue inked background. And what happens is when Distress Oxide ink comes in contact with water, it lightens and turns a little bit white and brightens. So you see that yellow ink on the blue background. So the one on the left is just stamped with water. The one on the right has that yellow ink with it. And it really looks cool in real life. Let me do a few more examples. This time I'm using the Center Cut Burst stamp, but I'm only using the outside section. Here I have a piece of regular white cardstock that I've covered generously with Abandoned Coral Distress Oxide ink. I'm inking up my stamp with that Squeezed Lemonade Distress Oxide once again, covering up my project, misting the stamp a few times with water, and then stamping that down. And what we'll end up with is a bright yellow stamped image on that coral background. And something unique about these inks is that they leave kind of a chalky looking finish that's just gorgeous. So this background looks very different than something else I would create with normal inks. Now I wanted to intensify that yellow, so I am again stamping with the Distress Oxide ink and a bit of water right into the same spot. And this will intensify it a bit. Now you could skip the water and just stamp with the yellow on top of the peach background, but it won't stand out as much because the water reacts with the Distress Oxide ink and causes it to brighten a bit. Okay, so now I'm switching over to the center of the center cut burst stamp. This time I'm stamping this one up with the Candied Apple Distress Oxide ink. Mist it a few times and then stamp that to the center. Now this red ink is darker than the coral background, but we can really intensify the look of that by adding a little bit of that water. I always like to heat set this when I'm done, since we do have wet ink and a little bit of water on it. And you can see the beautiful results, and I like that I was able to stamp that background in 2 different colors because of that center cut design. Okay, I'm going to show you another example here. This is a white cardstock piece that I covered with Seedless Preserves Distress Oxide ink. On my stamp, I'm using some picked raspberry Distress Oxide ink, misting it with water, and stamping it onto the inked background. I like to kind of let the stamp sit there a bit so some of that water absorbs into the cardstock. So you can see that results in a light pink, white chalky looked stamped image. To intensify it, I'm going to repeat the process. And then you can see it's even brighter pink, but I want it even to be more pink. So this time I'm just inking up with the ink alone, no water, and stamping on top. So there we end up with the soft pink image on that purple background, and it's just beautiful in real life. Now I'm going to pull these backgrounds into cards a little bit later in this video, but first I wanted to show you another type of cardstock that you can use for this technique and get different results. Here I'm going to be using the same ink, Distress Oxide ink, but this time on glossy cardstock. The cardstock that I know works for this technique is the Tim Holtz alcohol ink cardstock. I've showed this technique in a previous video and I'll link to it here. But you can actually use the Distress Oxide ink and water on this cardstock. You just need to protect it when you're done. Here I have applied a heavy amount of, this is Salty Ocean Distress Oxide ink. And you can see it goes on very thick like paint since this is a glossy cardstock. I do buff off the extra onto a cloth, and this is a reusable cloth that I can just throw into the wash. So I'll just tape this temporarily into my MISTI as I did before, and I'm going to repeat the same process. I'm inking up with the Distress Oxide in the Squeeze Lemonade color, misting that stamp and stamping it onto the background. I find the Squeeze Lemonade works great with this technique because it's such a light ink, and when that water stamps with it, it comes really bright and kind of glows. So there you can see when you stamp that on that glossy cardstock, you still get the cool result. And that's not completely dried, but you can get an idea of how it works on that also. Here's another example. This is the alcohol ink cardstock covered with picked raspberry Distress Oxide ink. And I'm stamping with the Squeezed Lemonade ink and some water. Okay, so here's another example. I really like the Black Soot Distress Oxide ink. It ends up giving this beautiful like chalkboard look when it's on regular cardstock, but on the alcohol ink cardstock, the glossy cardstock that I'm using here, it ends up this dark gray that is really gorgeous. So I'm going to rub off the excess here. I put down as much ink as I can. I actually put 2 coats down. I'm inking up my stamp with Salty Ocean Distress Oxide ink, misting it with water and stamping it down, and you can see how cool this technique is, even on the darkest color of Distress Oxide ink. So that blue kind of glows thanks to the water that's reacting with the Black Soot ink, and then the blue that's added in. Now I know people are going to ask if you could use other glossy cardstocks for this technique, and I'm not sure. You can try the ones that you may have. However, I know that the Tim Holtz alcohol ink cardstock works. And again, check out that video that I did showing more techniques using that cardstock and Distress Oxide ink. It's a great cardstock to invest in. Now, since we applied ink to a glossy cardstock and it doesn't really absorb into it, I do recommend making sure that it's protected. I just grabbed this clear finish matte spray that I happen to have because my daughter and I paint rocks and put them outside. So I just sprayed this onto my alcohol ink cardstock that I did this Distress Oxide technique on. And that way I can be sure none of the color rubs off. And this happened to work great for me. I also sprayed this on the white cardstock pieces that I made earlier after I did the Distress Oxide, just so I could be sure that the card is protected. If you have some other sort of fixative, you can give that a try too. Another option when protecting your alcohol ink cardstock that you've covered with Distress Oxide ink is to use Tim Holtz Microglaze. You just apply a thin coat of it and buff the excess off, and this protects it completely. And it also makes the colors more intense. So anywhere we did that like yellow ink with the water stamping, it becomes more yellow there. In this case, it becomes green because of the blue underneath. But some of that lightness that we created with the water does go away if you use the microglaze, but it does work excellent too. Be sure to watch that other video once again because it really shares a lot about using the alcohol ink cardstock along with Distress Oxide ink. Okay, so now it's time to take all of these backgrounds that I created, and I have even more examples, and turn them into cards. And I actually made a bunch of mom cards. Now, of course, I only have one mom and one mother-in-law, but I made a ton of mom cards, and it's with good reason. So I know two moms right now who are going through some really challenging times with their kids. And they're doing everything they can to take care of their kids, and they're being super moms. So I decided I was going to make some cards for these two moms and some others to just say, you're doing a good job, mama. You've got this. Hang in there. I'm here if you need me. You're a great mom. Just in a bit of encouragement to these moms that I know sometimes struggle quite a bit, as I do too. So Simon Says Stamp just did a release, which these background stamps are from, and they did a lot of Mom and Mother's Day products. So I decided to use those for everyday encouragement cards for fellow moms. And I incorporated these products with older sentiment stamp sets that I have so I could get more from those products. So I have a bunch of tips for you here, and I'll share them as I go. Okay, so most of my cards use the Simon Says Stamp Bold Mom dies. Now, the nice thing about these dies is that there is the bold mom style, like a bold font, and then the cursive mom style. Then also the dies to cut the shadow for both. And I love die sets that include the shadow. I also use on most of my cards a pearly looking vellum. This is the Grafix Platinum Vellum, and it has a beautiful pearly shine to it that really goes well with the style of cards that I did today. And here it is in comparison to a regular vellum, which is beautiful too, but doesn't have the shimmer. I'll also be using the Simon Says Stamp Messages for Everyday stamp set. This is a new one with pretty much every occasion you could want. Lots of encouraging ones in here also. And I use this on the inside of most of today's cards, which you'll see as we go. Okay, so let's start looking at the cards that I created. I'm going to show you the final product because I wanted to save some time, and it's pretty simple, but I'll show some steps along the way. For this card, I have the Distress Oxide background that I created earlier in this video on regular white cardstock, so it has that beautiful chalky finish. I used the Mom Bold dies to die cut the letters for Mom, and I stacked a few white cardstock ones together for added dimension. Then I used the coordinating shadow die to cut from that platinum vellum, and I have that behind it. Now for the sentiment across the mom, I used Keep Shining Bright from this older Simon Says Stamp Seen Stars stamp set. I thought that was a nice encouraging message for a fellow mom. I also added a few pearls to the end of the burst that you see in the background. Okay, my next example, this one I did the seedless preserves on the alcohol ink cardstock, so it's got that shiny finish. And then I had stamped on this with picked raspberry, Distress Oxide ink, and some water. Now this one says, Mama, you totally got this. And in the inside, I stamped, I'm here from you, from that Everyday Messages stamp set that I showed you earlier. This is a nice encouraging message for a friend. That Mama is white heat embossed on vellum, and I used the coordinating die to cut it out. This is a beautiful new stamp set from Simon Says Stamp, and it is a Mother's Day theme, but I was able to use it for these encouragement cards also. Now for the You Totally Got This message, I used the older Simon Says Stamp Simple Sentiments 1 stamp set. It's fun to look through your old stamps and find what works with your current cards. Okay, now for my next example, I thought I'd show you how you can get more out of the center cut stamps that I've been using in this video. So the center portion of this uses the Distress Oxide technique, but the outside is just white cardstock. So I have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding white note card here. I am going to stamp the outside of this burst stamp with VersaMark ink onto that note card. Once I'm done, I'll add that beautiful Hero Arts Satin Pearl embossing powder. This is definitely my favorite embossing powder right now. It has a beautiful pearl shine. And depending on what color cardstock you do your heat embossing on, it picks up that color. In this case, it'll just be a white pearl result. For the center of the card, I cut out a burst stamp image that I did with the Distress Oxide technique on the alcohol ink cardstock, so it has a bit of a glossy finish to it. I added the white heat embossed mama on vellum, and then I have the sentiment Keep Shining Bright, which I showed you earlier in this video. So you can see how you've got the shine in the center of this card because we use the glossy cardstock, but then you have the pearly pattern that fits perfectly around it since we use that center cut stamp. And by the way, for that center portion, I used Abandoned Coral Distress Oxide ink on the alcohol ink cardstock. Then I stamped with Squeezed Lemonade Distress Oxide ink and a bit of water, and that's the result we get there in the center. I'm hoping this bright card will cheer up my friend. Okay, now here is another example where I use the center cut burst stamp, but a different design. In this case, I did the center part of the burst by stamping with the Squeezed Lemonade Distress Oxide ink in water on a background that I created with Picked Raspberry Distress Oxide ink and the alcohol ink cardstock. So you can see it's got that little bit of a glossy finish. I've arranged my background stamp to fit perfectly with the burst in the center, using my anti-static powder tool, and then stamping that with VersaMark ink. Next, I will again add that Satin Pearl embossing powder from Hero Arts. And in this case, it'll pick up the pink color from behind it, and you get this beautiful subtle shine. I trimmed this down and I put it onto a 4.5 by 4.5 inch white note card. And then I used the Simon Says Stamp Big Thanks die set. I die cut the word thanks 3 times and glued them on top of each other so they'd have dimension. On the top layer, I pressed VersaMark ink on top and added the Hero Arts Satin Pearl embossing powder so that the thanks die cut has that pearly shine which matches the background nicely. Now this particular card design uses that alcohol ink cardstock which has that glossy finish. If you don't have that cardstock, you could use regular white cardstock and do the same card design. It would look very similar but with that chalky background look. Okay, back to some more encouraging mom cards. This one says, Mom, you're a star. And for this background, I did the Salty Ocean Distress Oxide ink directly onto that alcohol ink cardstock. And then I stamped with the Squeezed Lemonade Distress Oxide ink and a bit of water. I showed this particular background in this video earlier. And I don't have to worry about anything rubbing off because I did use that spray to make sure it's protected. Now for that You're a Star, this is actually from the Simon Says Stamp Under the Sea Animal stamp set. Completely different theme, but I dug through my stamps to find a sentiment that said You're a Star. My friend Heather actually said, you know, the new set has this sentiment. Perfect, and that's what I used in the center. So it goes to show you to look at any stamp sets you have for messages that you can use along with a word die to get a completely different meaning. And in the inside, you can write a message of encouragement telling a mom how great she's doing. Now for this background, this is one I created earlier in the video on regular white cardstock. So I applied a heavy amount of the Seedless Preserves Distress Oxide ink onto white cardstock, then stamped that heart center cut background stamp with the Picked Raspberry Distress Oxide ink and a bit of water. I did spray that so I don't have to worry about it being damaged or any of it rubbing off, and you get that beautiful chalky finish. Now for the center of this, I stamped the center of the background stamp with VersaMark ink onto vellum, and then I used that satin pearl embossing powder from Hero Arts, and I cut it out and glued it right to the center. I used a stacked mom die cut, and then this message that says You Are Great from this older Simon Says Stamp set. The sentiment actually says you are a great friend, but I left the friend off so that it matched up and made the sentiment you are a great mom. Here's another example of the Distress Oxide stamping technique on regular white cardstock. You can see that fun background that you get there that's very subtle. In the center, I have the mom with the vellum shadow behind it. And then I added the "You are a stellar" right in the center of it. The sentiment actually says you're a stellar human, but I left the word human off and I just added it to the mom, completely changing the sentiment and making it a great mom encouragement card. Now this one's the one I actually am going to give to my mom for Mother's Day. It says "So grateful for you" across it. These mom letter die cuts I covered with the Youre Satin Pearl Embossing Powder, so they have a beautiful pearly shine to it that is just gorgeous in real life. I again have the vellum heart center with, again, the pearl embossing on it. Really like that pearl embossing powder, and it looks great on that vellum. Now that's "So grateful for you" is from this same Love You Mama stamp set. So there are sentiments in there that you can use for non-Mother's Day cards also. Now this is the only card that I actually did with the flowers center cut stamp from Simon Says Stamp that I showed you at the beginning of the video. Along with it, I used the Simon Says Stamp Adeline butterfly die and the stitching butterfly dies. I have them both together in this package. I actually used them all, die cut them from white cardstock, and glued them together so that I would end up with a butterfly with lots of dimension. And I just did this from white cardstock. Now I'm going to cover this with that Youre Satin Pearl Embossing Powder and wait till you see how pretty this is. I pressed VersaMark ink on the top of it, dipped it into that Satin Pearl Embossing Powder, and I'm heat setting it. Once it's cool, I'm going to do the same thing again so that I have a thick layer of this pearl embossing powder on the die cut, and so it gets in like the nooks and crannies of the stacked die cut. So once I heat set this, you'll see that my die cut goes from being plain white cardstock to a beautiful pearly shine. Now I added this butterfly to a background that I created with the same Distress Oxide technique. I started with white cardstock, and in this case, I used the Lucky Clover Distress Oxide ink and covered my white cardstock. I then stamped with that flower image in the center with the Squeeze Lemonade Distress Oxide ink and a bit of water. And you can see how beautiful and subtle and soft that background is. I added my pearl die cut to the center there, along with the "So grateful" message right across it. And this is one that I'll just send to a friend. Okay, so this is the point at which I ran out of time because my kids were going to be home from school soon. So I just made two quick last ones with two of the backgrounds that I really liked. Now this background was created on the alcohol ink cardstock, so it has that glossy shine to it that's just gorgeous. So I kept the center very simple. I used an older Simon Says Stamp die set that says "You're a star," and it also cuts those cute little stars. I just die cut from white and added it right directly to the center of the card. And the star pattern in the background fits the sentiment perfectly. And my last card is completely different. Remember how I told you I really liked the black soot Distress Oxide ink? When pressed onto white cardstock, it gave a chalkboard look. Well, that's what I did here. Just white cardstock with black soot Distress Oxide ink over it. Then I stamped with the star background stamp, and I used a few different colors of Distress Oxide. I actually used Abandoned Coral, Squeeze Lemonade, and Peacock Feather Distress Oxide inks, spritzed it with water and stamped it on the black background, and you get that really cool look. I then added the "Whoa, You're Amazing" die. This is just a white die cut, and this is a new Simon Says Stamp die that I think is really great, and I plan to give this card to my son. Because the Distress Oxide ink gives that kind of chalky look on a background, it's not actually chalky, it's just that look, it's real creamy. It works perfect for this chalkboard looking background. Now remember I said I would show you how to do this technique with traditional Distress ink? If you don't have Oxide ink, you can use traditional Distress ink, but it'll work a little bit differently. I'll be using regular white cardstock again, but this time with the traditional Distress ink. Traditional Distress ink is a special dye ink that reacts with water. The results will be different, but they're still cool. Here I have Distress ink in the Salty Ocean color, and I'm covering a piece of white cardstock. I'm putting this into my MISTI, and I'm going to show you again what it looks like if you just stamp with water. There's no ink on the stamp, just water. The ink does react with the water, not as intense as the Oxide ink does, but here you can see you get this ghost-like image that's really gorgeous for a subtle background. If you want to add color into that, here I'm inking up my stamp with Squeeze Lemonade regular distress ink, misting that with water, and stamping that onto our blue inked background. Again, this won't turn out as intense because there is no pigment property to this ink. So the yellow blends with that blue, giving you green. It looks cool, but it's not as obvious or as intense as the Oxide ink, because the Oxide ink has those special properties that give you that kind of oxidized look, that whiteness that causes the brightness that you see in the different colors of these backgrounds. But if you only have traditional distress ink, you can definitely do the technique. All right, there you have it. Another crafting episode from me. Definitely way too long to be calling a video, so I'm going to call it an episode. I hope you'll try this technique. In the middle are 2 other videos you might like. One is on Distress Oxide inks, and one is about that Distress Oxide ink on alcohol ink cardstock. So check those out if you haven't. Thanks for spending this time with me. We'll see you soon, and have a great day.